All right, welcome back to the Popecast. This time around, we're joined with Donald Paul Maddox from Mobile, Alabama. I actually forgot to ask you which parish you work at, but I know him from his excellent newsletter on Substack, In Defense of Theology, where we were unexpectedly introduced, but happily so. So yeah, I'm really grateful for you coming on the show today. But yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to be here.
So we'll get into nerding out on the Vatican Constitution, Universi Dominici Gregis. Yeah, Dominici Gregis. Yeah.
I don't speak Latin, but I can sometimes pronounce the titles.
Right. Yes, I am right there with you.
Yes.
So we'll go into that pretty heavily for today's episode. But before we get going, I'd love for you to share a little bit about who you are, where you're from, what your background is, how you got into this. Writing about theology and what you do for a day job in addition to your hobby of writing and teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for having me. It's good to be here. My name is Donald Paul Maddox. Like Matthew said, I am from Mobile, Alabama, in the deep South. Literally right on the water, like all the beaches, all that. Where Mobile is on the river, which empties into the bay, into the Gulf. So we're hot and humid already. We're in summer already. We've been in summer for a while now. So
since last summer?
Since last summer, yeah. We have about 2 weeks of winter. This is really funny. This is a very side note, but we had the biggest snowstorm in 150 years. I think it was January. We got like 8 or 9 inches of snow.
Oh my gosh, are you serious?
And so I can get into this later, but I was in seminary in Indiana for 2 years, and I don't know if we ever got that much snow when I was up there. We had a number of big snowstorms, but we got 9 inches. We were closed for like a whole week.
Holy cow!
Because the city obviously has no earthly idea what to do with that.
Oh, of course not.
But it was absolutely insane. My wife was like frolicking in the snow because she was this is perfect, but it was wild. So we went from that to like 95 degrees and 100% humidity. So everybody's allergies are bad and all that kind of stuff. But crazy event. So anyways, I'm from Mobile. Grew up Catholic, baptized as an infant. I went to Catholic school my entire life from preschool to 8th grade. Went to Catholic high school, and then when I got done with high school, I went to the local university here, which is the University of South Alabama. Pretty big school, nothing like state school size, but a good amount. And I was there for about 2 years. And while I was there, I had a reversion back to the faith. I never renounced the faith or gone away, but I was not very faithful. And I was kind of went to mass on Sundays, and that was really about it. But I had a reversion back to the faith through Focus and through the Catholic Student Center. Started going to daily mass and kind of doing all the things. And after a couple months, I had an experience where the Lord was calling me to seminary, and I'd never thought about it before and all that kind of stuff, and figured that I was called to that, got accepted. So I ended up leaving after my second year at South and entered seminary in Louisiana for the Archdiocese of Mobile. And I was there for 2 years and got my undergraduate degree, which is in philosophy and theology. They do a weird kind of combined degree for those that already have college experience. So my degree is actually it's called philosophy and theological studies. It's really just philosophy, but we took theology classes as well. And then went to major seminary, which we go to St. Meinrad, which is in Indiana. And I was there for about 2 years. I didn't complete my second year. Realized I was not called to the priesthood, so I ended up leaving, got home, and met my wife 11 days later.
No kidding.
We went to the same high school. She was 2 years behind me, but I didn't know her. I might have known her name, but that was about it. So it wasn't like I knew her in seminary and then left. And, it wasn't like that. I literally met her 11 days after and started dating. And we got married, or we got engaged about 10 months after starting dating, and then got married And then we have a 15-month-old now, and we're about to have a second son in like 7 weeks. So we've been married for about 2 years now. So for my day job, I work at a Catholic parish. Actually, I'm from Mobile, and I live in Mobile, but I work in Fairhope, which is basically just across the bay. It's like 35 minutes away. And I drive over here to that. But it's a big parish, super vibrant. It's more of a retirement city or town, really. But there's a mix of people, but very faithful, very active parish. Most of the events we have are hundreds of people, which is not normal down here, maybe anywhere, but
Sure.
especially
Yeah.
down here. And so I basically teach the parish. I'm not the adult minister that does like OCIA and all that kind of stuff. We have somebody separate for that, but I do basically catechesis and evangelization for the parishioners. I don't do a whole lot of outreach kind of outside the parish. My job is more for how do we engage people that are already here. And then, we have a podcast, so we do a little bit outside as well. So I, teach book studies. I teach kind of in-depth theology and philosophy classes. I am teaching the Constitutions of Vatican II right now to a class, and then teaching on purgatory and indulgences and really whatever kind of strikes my fancy or what I'm reading at the time that I think would be really interesting to teach the parish. So that's what I do. And then, like I said, we have a podcast that the pastor and I do together. We've been doing that for about a year now. We've got, I think, like 57 or so episodes called In Defense of Theology, but that's for parishioners. Originally, it was for our parishioners, but it's grown to be much bigger than just our parishioners. So it's really for anybody in the parish. Evangelization in the sense of evangelizing those that are already in the pews that either need to be re-engaged or that want to go deeper and don't really kind of know how to do that. So that's what that's for. So that's my day job. How we met, obviously, is on Substack. I write an essay. Well, I write a newsletter collecting essays on, it's called In Defense of Theology. Basically, the idea was I'm already doing this in the parish. This is what I love to do. I've got higher education in this. I believe it in faith for myself, and I want other people to be able to access that. And I found particularly there's a lot of people that want to learn the faith kind of at a high level, more than you would just get, watching YouTube videos or, I don't know, going to classes at the parish, but don't have access to get a degree in the field. As I know, as most people know, it's kind of hard to make a decent living working for the church. It is a sacrifice, and it's a good sacrifice, but it is. So most people are not going to get a degree in philosophy and definitely in theology. So I said, well, why don't I basically write a newsletter that does that for people? It's not a substitute for that. I say that all the time on the newsletter. I'm not trying to take the place, and I'm not competent enough to like award degrees or something like that. But
Right.
I want to give you the type of information that I received in those classes and the type of information that I read when I'm reading theology. So if it's something that strikes me, it's probably something that's going to strike somebody else.
Yeah.
And so I want to kind of distill that and give that to people. And I found that my gift is not necessarily like innovation. Like I'm not really like thinking about the cutting edge of theology in the church and like ruminating over that and kind of developing that maybe in the future. But that's not really my gift. My gift is more like analysis and distilling, which is what we'll talk about with the document. That's kind of what I did. And I found that I'm good at that. And I think people like that. I would like that if I was in that position as well. And so that's really what I do with that essay, with all of the essays that I write. And again, that's what I do at the parish too. So it kind of culminates together very nicely. And I have a lot of free time to be able to do that. And so I really enjoy it. And been doing that for about 5 months now on Substack, and, grown a lot, and people seem to really like it. So just keep doing it and see where the Lord takes us.
Yeah. That's incredible. Sorry, yeah, a lot of questions that come with that. But so first, just for my listeners here, excuse me, just for our listeners, yeah, I think you found me. So
I think
I have the,
so.
yeah, Today in Papal History is my newsletter.
Mhm.
Mine is much more appropriately titled a newsletter. Yours, I feel like, rises way above the title of newsletter just
I
because of the sheer quality of it.
so I keep as you know, you're always kind of tinkering and like trying to, and I started in like January and I still have not quite figured out what to name the thing. It's kind of like taken on its own, because I enjoy like heavy kind of essay type of writing. And so it's kind of a newsletter. And then I was like, maybe it's more of a journal, but I'm not really like I'm not heady enough. Like I'm not
Right.
purporting to be something that I'm not. So that's funny you say that because I don't really understand what the type of thing I'm doing is, but I'm just kind of doing it, and hopefully that it reveals itself
Mhm.
to me in the future.
Well, and now that you're saying that, I do think Substack has started calling them publications
Yes.
instead of newsletters. Anyway, probably for exactly that reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was very grateful for you in, again, a very unexpected way. I'm happy to get subscribers, but I hadn't been going hot and heavy towards, growing it or something. I am notoriously disorganized in terms of process, and it's a side thing, and
Yeah.
I don't do something that's like topically similar for a day
Mhm.
job. I'm a contractor, remodeler. So it's just kind of just is a hobby. So one day when, yeah, all of a sudden, why are there more subscribers than the normal click of, a
Mhm.
few per week or whatever? And it says recommended by In Defense of Theology by Donald Paul Maddox. I'm thinking, maybe I'll check this out. And so, then I go a deep dive down all the stuff that you've been putting out. And it's, yeah, extremely high quality. And I imagine it's probably a similar sentiment to the people that you find in your parish as far as a hunger for it. Because I was thinking of my grandmother who died a few years ago, um, as you were talking, because we had a pastor who had gotten a couple advanced degrees. I want to say before seminary or something. I don't remember
Mhm.
exactly why, but he did a lot of really good quality adult education courses
Mhm.
on stuff like that. And she was one who had always been very faithful through all of the crazy of the 70s and 80s.
Mhm.
And I think always had a hunger for stuff like that, and maybe just never was able to put a name for it. But then as soon as there was something on offer that had some rich
Mhm.
meat to it, she just ate it up. And we would talk about it all the time for
Mhm.
a long time about all the things that she learned. So I'm just wondering if you kind of have found why your courses are so popular and why your publication, excuse me, is so popular. Do you kind of find this a similar sort of sentiment that people are
Yeah,
just
I think
eating up?
so. Especially in the parish, I think it was always you kind of hear this all the time. So it's not really beating a dead horse, but or maybe it is beating a dead horse. But you always find, post Vatican II, we got into that. Everybody just wants like the sentimentality of Catholicism, and we kind of lost the. That's kind of Bishop Barron's like trumpet that he always blows, which I think is correct. Is we did lose the intellectual side after, and maybe it was a genuine reaction to maybe a hyper intellectualized, and
Sure.
we needed more of the faith aspect, and I think that's fine, but you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater either, and I think we did. And so I think through specifically the papacies of John Paul, Benedict, Francis a little bit. He just wasn't as intellectual as the other two.
Yeah.
But my personal hero is Ratzinger, Pope Benedict. So especially through him, through Introduction to Christianity, through the Jesus of Nazareth series, all of that type of more normalized books that he wrote, I think we kind of recaptured that sense of no, like people really are hungering for rich things, not to the extent of let's get rid of the like go sit in the chapel and pray, but like those need to come together. Benedict and Hans of Walther talk about like a kneeling theology, and I think that is really what we what we need right now in the church, which I think we've kind of recaptured a little bit. And so what I do in the parish, what I do on Substack, I think is kind of trying to do that of, you know, we learn all these heady things in college and in classes, and our teachers expect us to know calculus. They expect us to know, very in-depth intellectual things, and yet we don't do that with the faith.
Yeah.
And we have the same type of thing to offer. And so I want to help do that. And I think Bishop Barron and, Ascension, all those are kind of doing that same thing. And so I just think of myself kind of in that kind of, not to that level, obviously, but in that same degree of, I want to offer people things that they're not going to find normally. And people seem to really like it. I've grown a ton since then. And so, yeah, I think there is a need for it. And I think there is a hunger for it. And I think people are wanting to dive deeper into those kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad to hear that that's your experience too. Cause it just seems like it's kind of universal all over the place. And it's good that it's kind of the pendulum swinging maybe just back into the middle and starting to settle down. I want to say I saw this yesterday or the day before, an old video of then Cardinal Ratzinger from maybe the 80s. After Mass, he's it's not divesting. He's taking his vestments off after Mass, and somehow there's a reporter back there who's asking him questions. And I think in his homily, I gleaned that he had maybe criticized someone during the homily, and the reporter's doing the reporter thing and saying, how could you criticize this person for X, Y, and Z? And Cardinal Ratzinger gave a beautiful answer that was about a minute long, which is perfectly in keeping with who he was.
Mm-hmm.
But he basically said, in order to properly love someone, you have to tell them the truth, because love isn't love without the truth, and the truth isn't truth without love. But we have to, it begs the question, Pilate asked it, I suppose, what is truth? What is love? And that requires some depth. Otherwise we, sink into this sentimentality and, which can be good and beautiful as far as it goes, but it's just way, way too easy. And I guess not to be critical overly of Pope Francis or anything, but that's one of the accusations that was often leveled at him, was because there wasn't as often like an intellectual depth to it. It risked, descending into a sort of sentimentality.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think so. And yeah, again, I'm not, I think I fall more on the side of like, I give deference to the papacy, not in the sense of like popes are not open to criticism. They certainly are. They're not divine or anything like that. But, I think what you're saying is correct. It's like you can genuinely criticize things. There's things, I have a big devotion to John Paul II. There are things that he did that were just not good. And he's a man. I mean, you're gonna make mistakes. I think that's fine. And I think we have a duty to say that. And I think that's helpful. But I do get frustrated when people get the, we don't have to go on to it, but just the high criticisms of Pope Francis. And it's like, okay, but like, where is that? Is that coming from a place of like charity, or like you just like bashing it because you like to do that, And I don't think that's helpful. And whoever's elected next is going to suffer from the same stuff. It's like, they have their flaws, they have their strengths, and it's our job to help assist them and pray for them and, call them out when they need to be called out, and also don't defame anybody, especially the Supreme Pontiff. So,
yeah,
it is what it is. I mean, he's a man, so.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. What is it? I don't know if I've called it a few different things, but in my head, I think I call it an aggressively normal Catholicism is what I try to adhere to. It's like, let's not be weird. Let's not hit the extremes. Right. Let's remember that like life is messy and reality is real. Right. And, as much as it's, would be nice if the College of Cardinals listened to our preferences. Sorry, probably not. They're probably not going to, call a guy from Spokane, Washington, or from Mobile, Alabama. And but that doesn't mean it's not fun to, wax poetic on what would be cool to, hear. And I think it's good even in spite of that, to get into what I hoped we'd spend the majority of our time talking about, why it's good to understand the way that the church works. One, because it's exciting. This is only the 266th time that there's been a papal interregnum. The 265th man, which is one of my favorite papal fun facts, because Pope Benedict the Ninth had two. I guess would we call them interregna? The only guy who's had multiple. But at any rate, it's very exciting. It's something that in the last, I think, 300 years happens on average only every 10 to 12 years. And I think in the last 100 years, it's only the seventh time in the last 120 years. So it is very exciting. So you did a 2-part series, which I'll make sure to link in the description, both in the podcast and on YouTube, to both of those posts on Universi Dominici Gregis, which is the constitution governing what the church does in between after a pope dies until there's a new one elected. So let's just start. Maybe give an overview. I realize you said, I think before we started recording, that it doesn't read like a riveting novel. It's quite the opposite. But you did the hard work for us and read through the whole thing. So yeah, just kind of the quick hits. What does it cover, and why does it exist? And yeah, what's the purpose for it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess just to start, and you would know this as a papal fanatic, but the conclave process as we have it now obviously has developed like everything does in the church, but it was originally formulated in 1274 with Pope Gregory X with a papal bull, because I don't remember who the Pope was before him, but the Pope before him was elected like after a 3-year interregnum. And the church was like, yeah, we can't do that again. Like that's not good. It basically completely stalls anything formally happening in the church. Like you can't elect bishops without a pope. Like very important things don't happen. So he basically formulated this process of the conclave, pretty similar to what we have now. Some practicalities are different. That was 800 years ago. But after a few popes, it kind of got pushed away, came back, and then it was finally officially formulated. So really for almost 750 years, we've had this process of a conclave. The way it takes shape has, again, kind of evolved, kind of taken different turns. It used to only be like basically Italian cardinals, so it was very easy to get them together. Now we have 200 and something cardinals. There's 133 that are cardinal electors from all over the world. So it needs to be more formalized. John Paul II wrote this constitution, which is called Universi Dominici Gregis. It was in 1996. He talks about in there at the beginning, it's not abnormal for a pontiff to update the rules concerning the papal interregnum. He lists, there's a ton of them before him that have listed. He's like, I'm not going back on what they said. I'm just basically updating it in line with where the church is now. He specifically mentions with the update of canon law that was in 1983, which was an update from, I believe it was 1917 from that code. So a lot had changed, specifically juridically in the church, because canon law was updated. So the process for the interregnum needed to be updated as well. So he issues this pretty lengthy constitution. It's about 16 pages. I think it's like 97-ish numbered paragraphs. And it really reads like canon law. It is not like an encyclical. It's very legally worded, because that's what it's supposed to do. It's governing the process when there is no pope. So things can be a little dicey when there's no figure of authority to make decisions. So a lot has to be taken into consideration. So the interregnum we are in now is still governed by this document from 1996. However, it has been updated twice. It was updated twice by Pope Benedict XVI. Very, very minor. He basically kind of tweaked a few different things. One was in 2007 which basically changed. Currently, we have for a pope to be elected validly, he has to be elected by a 2/3 majority of the electors present. And John Paul had that, and then he kind of updated it a little bit after a certain number of ballots. If it gone on, they could change a little bit. I think it was basically like a simple majority.
Was it 33? So our previous guest, I think he had said it was 33. But
it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's like, it still reads in this document. It's like, if there are 3 days of ballots and there's 4 ballots a day, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. So after 3 days, if there's still no election, which is about 12 ballots, they stop for a day, prayer, conversation. They go again, 3 days, prayer, conversation, 3 day, so I think it's after the 4th time. It used to be that there was a change in the way the voting worked. And I believe it was something like a simple majority obviously for the sake of getting a pope elected. But in 2007, Pope Benedict updated that and said the only valid way for a pope to be elected is with a 2/3 majority, even if it goes that long. So if it goes, you just keep going until you get a 2/3. However, if it gets to that point, I believe it's after the 4th round of those 3-day with one time or 1 day to pause, that the 2 names that are receiving the most votes are basically the only 2 they can vote for. So it basically comes down to those 2, and then you vote for those 2 until you get a 2/3 majority, however long that takes. So that was updated in 2007. And then in 2013, he updated it again, and this was a little bit longer. He probably changed, I don't know, 5 or 6 numbered paragraphs and just updated them with different things, specifically the balloting process, stuff like that, kind of minor. Mm-hmm. So that's the last time. So 2013, and remember, Benedict retired in 2013. So this was really one of the last things he did before he retired. And then Francis did not touch the process. So it's still being governed by 2007, and the 2013, all from that one constitution. So we're still in that. And so as the process is going now, that is still what's being governed. So without going kind of super into the weeds, because it's a long document, as we have all seen, it's been reported, once the Pope dies, the see is immediately vacant. So we are immediately in a sedevacante, papal interregnum. The Cardinal Camerlengo, who is basically the Pope's Chamberlain, which I believe is Cardinal Farrell, who I think he's American, isn't he?
He's was born in Ireland, but was an American bishop.
Crazy. That's so strange that we only have like 10 cardinals, but that the Camerlengo is American is crazy. Mm-hmm. But basically, he certifies the death. Used to be with the little hammer. They don't do that anymore. We have medical doctors for that. But there's still a lot of ceremony involved. There has to be some certification. They seal the papal apartments, as we all saw, and then the Pope's funeral is the date of that is decided. It's between 4 and 6 days following the death of the Pope, or the vacancy, if like Pope Benedict, if he abdicates. So we had Pope Francis' funeral last Saturday, and from the date that the Pope dies or is vacant, they have 15 days to start the conclave. So once 15 days hits, the conclave must begin. If for some reason they need to delay it, it can be delayed up to 20 days total from the date that the see is empty. So between 15 and 20 days after the death or the vacancy, the conclave must begin. So this one will begin on May 7th, which is day, I believe, 16. So they're right in there. I believe that was the same time period of when Benedict was abdicated, and when Francis, that for that conclave was, I believe, about 16 days. So it's pretty normal. And during that time, basically all function of the Vatican stops. So the Cardinal Parolin is the Secretary of State. Basically, that seat basically becomes vacant. There is no Secretary of State anymore. The only things that really continue are some of the prefects kind of do some stuff, like if they have to, But the Apostolic Penitentiary, which deals specifically with indulgences, that office does continue. And frankly, other than that, they all cease because there is no pope. So during this time, specifically once the pope dies, all of the cardinals are called to Rome. So they'll be there for the funeral, and then they start what are called congregations. So this began even before the funeral took place. There's two types. There are general congregations, which are basically a gathering of all of the cardinals that are present. So, and it's really, they are required that they show up. And it doesn't have to be just the electing cardinals. It can also be the cardinals who are over the age of 80. And obviously, we know that the document specifies that any cardinal over the age of 80 is ineligible to vote. I did not know this. The way they determine whether or not you're 80 is if you turn 80 the day before the see becomes vacant, you're ineligible to vote. So if you're 79, if your 80th birthday is on the day that the Pope dies, you're eligible to vote.
Oh,
because
wow.
it's the day, like you have to be 79 prior to the vacancy. So an interesting one is like Cardinal Sarah or Cardinal Sarah actually turns 80, I believe, in like a couple weeks.
No way.
Yeah, he's 79.
Just made it.
I believe it's like maybe a month and a half. So even if he's 80 during the conclave, he's still eligible to vote because he was not 80 at the time that Pope Francis passed away. So it's legalistic. So you are legally eligible to vote at this time or not. I had somebody ask me in our subscriber chat on Substack, was like, why in the world is 80 the cutoff? That seems very weird. And John Paul's basically like, yeah, we don't want the cardinals that are over 80 to be burdened by the weight of electing the future pope. It seems like it's because, yeah, you're older. You're not going to have to deal with the consequences of who is elected.
Right.
Because you're older, and we don't want you to be burdened by that weight. So yeah, you're ineligible to vote. Which, I mean, I don't know how. I don't want to say he was, wrong for doing that, but it's a very strange reason. But I mean, hey, he can do whatever he wants. So
yeah, you got to.
That's not abnormal. That's always that's. I don't know how long that rule has been in place, but John Paul didn't like come up with that rule or anything like that. So it's just an interesting kind of side note for that. And then, as we all know, with Cardinal Becciu, kind of the disgraced cardinal who tried to get to be eligible to vote, and it's already been squashed. He's not going to vote. And the document is also very clear that those that are under 80 are eligible to vote unless they have been basically defrocked. So they have willingly given up their authority as cardinal, or it has been taken from them. In I believe it was maybe 2022. I believe it was.
It's been like kind of a pet obsession of mine just because it's so funny.
Yeah.
It was in 2020.
2020. Okay.
The only reason I remember that is because when he got canned from the College of Cardinals by Pope Francis, again for financial crimes and all sorts of stuff, he literally said that he was mad that these accusations were being levied because it would ruin his chances of becoming Pope. I'm thinking like Martin Scorsese couldn't write a better line if he was telling a story about a Renaissance cardinal with delusions of grandeur. Like he literally said it without any sense of irony. But yeah, that's interesting that's in the document too.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But again, I mean, the document is a legal binding constitution. So if you did not have that, you would have, frankly, just disarray because you wouldn't know who's in charge. You wouldn't know how things are done. So basically, the person that is in charge during the interregnum is the entire college. So the College of Bishops, the College of Cardinals, make decisions. They cannot make any decisions that would thwart or be contrary to what the previous pontiff did. So they can't redo this document. They have no authority to do that. They obviously have no authority to do anything that a pope can do. So they can't instate bishops. We saw like the postponing of canonizations because only a pope can do that. So you have to postpone that until there's a new pope. So things like that can't occur. It says basically any ordinary business is basically up to the authority of the Cardinal Camerlengo and 3 elected cardinals from the 3 orders. So Cardinal Bishop, Cardinal Priest, and Cardinal Deacon. And those rotate. I believe it's every 3 days. Basically, they cast lots for them to see who it is. Any ordinary business is handled by them, whatever they consider ordinary. I'm not entirely sure,
Right.
but just very ordinary business. If anything major comes up, it has to go before the actual full college in those general congregations, and then they vote on it. Again, it can't be anything that's contrary to a previous pope or that is only by the authority of the pope. But if anything major does come up, that is who decides on that. So right now we are they're having general congregations every day. They established the date of the conclave. So they did that. I believe it was the Monday after the funeral of Pope Francis. They decided it was May 7th. So it will start on May 7th. So after the funeral, they have, I believe it's called the Novum Dialis.
Novum Dialis, yeah.
Novum Dialis,
Nine
which
days,
is the 9 days of mourning. And in the document, it calls it 9 days of funeral rites. So basically, they have funeral rites every day for 9 days after the funeral. And so the conclave doesn't start until after those are completed. So once those are completed, the conclave will then begin on May 7th. But every day they have these general congregations. And during these congregations, you can see pictures of it. Vatican News posts a lot of them. And they basically just decide different things. They have people or cardinals that will stand up and basically give their state of the church. So they, their area of concern, they state that, what they think, the church needs to be looking at. I believe it was Tuesday. We're recording this on Wednesday, but I believe it was yesterday. They talked about like the financial problems of the Vatican, and that needs to be topics of discussion. So they talked about that. They have cardinals can stand up and give their own little spiel, whatever they think. And usually, it's a number of them that do that per day. And that's basically what they're doing until the conclave. There's no official, what they call politicking. So you can't,
right.
Whatever that means. Politicking clearly goes on. Nobody's naive about that. But officially, there can be no politicking. There can be conversations, obviously, about who we think could fulfill this job, but there can be no formal running for a pope like we do in politics. So that is strictly forbidden. And then once the day of the conclave is to start, the process is very strict. So they will gather in St. Peter's Basilica, and there will be a mass, and it's called a mass pro elegendo papa. So that will be celebrated. So the mass will be celebrated in the morning. I believe it's at 10 o'clock as that mass is going to start. Once that ends, the next thing that will happen is the cardinals will gather in the Pauline Chapel of the Apostolic Palace, and they will chant the Veni Creator Spiritus together, and then they will solemnly process into the Sistine Chapel together, all of them, and then they will begin the conclave. As we know, the conclave is very strict, so they take oaths of secrecy. They're all housed in the Vatican at I can't remember what it's called. It's like
the Casa Santa Marta, where Pope Francis
Casa Santa
lived.
Marta.
He just never left.
Domine Santa, whatever it's called. They're all housed together. They've got no technology. They got no phones. They confiscate everything. I remember I was just watching a video on Cardinal Dolan. He was kind of talking about it. He's like our guy, I guess. The American that's telling everybody everything. But he was even saying at one point, I believe it was a cardinal from maybe Benedict's, because he was not at that election. And he said the cardinal reported to him that the doors or the windows of his room in that apartment were like shuttered shut, because apparently, I guess it used to be like you could send kind of secret messages by lights from the
Whoa,
outside,
yeah.
and you could like Morse code or something. So it's that strict. And so they can't receive newspapers, they can't receive any kind of news from the outside during the conclave process, because they want it to be completely strict. They take oaths of secrecy, and if you break that, you are subject to excommunication, automatic excommunication. So it's extremely strict. So then, when they are actually in the conclave, we talked about that. There's 2 votes in the morning, and there's 2 votes in the evening, and then that's it for every day. So May 7th will start obviously in the evening. I believe there will only be 1 ballot, maybe 2,
I heard
that day.
2. Yeah, I heard it was going to be the 2 afternoon
The
ones
2 afternoon
the
ballots.
first
So
day.
they will
Yeah.
cast those 2. So if there's no pope elected on the first ballot, they will immediately go into another ballot and they will revote. And then obviously, if there's no pope, they will conclude for the night, and then they will gather again in the morning and then start the whole process over. So that is basically what leads up to the actual conclave. And then the latter half of the document is basically verbatim how the process of voting works. And so we can get into that. I've got my notes here so I can go over it. I don't want to miss anything. Do you have any questions, or do you think people have any questions that people are thinking about before we get into the actual voting process?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, once this episode's out, I think it'd be cool to just like see what people think about it. It's made the rounds enough, but yeah, there's just an endless fascination. Even I mean, I'm sure you're the same way. Even going so deep into this as we have, I'm just still kind of in awe and appreciate it all the more because of how technological our society is now. I mean, it's cool enough, even in a non-technological society. It's like the cardinals being sequestered like this. There's incentives to not take 3 years, 2.5 years. Yes. I think was what that conclave of 1268 did. Where the citizens ripped the roof off of the palace in Viterbo where they were, reduced their rations to bread and water. It's like we don't want to have to do that again.
Yes.
So let's, how can we do this? But the secrecy of it is so cool. It reminds me of before airplanes had Wi-Fi and everybody had phones, that like airplanes were the last sacred place.
Yes.
Where there were no screens.
Yeah.
Like you had to read, you had to chat with your neighbor, you had to take a nap,
Yeah.
How many we're like in a world that just goes a million miles an hour, in a world where literally every media outlet on earth probably is in Rome. They have nothing to report on until there's black smoke and everybody gets the same message, and that's all until we have a pope and nobody can say anything. I'm just endlessly fascinated by that, and in awe of it.
Yeah, it's very cool. So the document is also it lays out who is allowed in the conclave. So not the voting, not the Sistine Chapel while they're voting, but the conclave in general, because they lock down once the conclave begins May 7th. Basically, the Vatican is shuttered. Obviously, you could get into the square and those kind of things, but like you obviously can't go into the Sistine Chapel, and so they basically lock down the Apostolic Palace, the place where they're staying. All that is locked, but there's a certain number of people that are allowed in there. So obviously, all of the cardinal electors are allowed in there, and then the secretary of the College of Cardinals, he's allowed in there. And he is also, they call him the secretary of the electoral assembly as well. It's the same person. So the secretary of the College of Cardinals is allowed. The master of papal liturgical celebrations is allowed in. 8 masters of ceremony are allowed in with him. 2 religious are allowed in, and they are part of what they call the papal sacristy. So those 2 are allowed in. A member of the clergy, so he has to be a member of the clergy. He is allowed in, and he is chosen by the cardinal dean, and he's there to assist him, I guess, in whatever capacity he needs. Priests are to be available to hear confessions of the cardinals. So it doesn't specify a number, but a number of them are in there for various languages, so they can go to confession if they need to. 2 medical doctors are allowed in case of emergencies. And cooks are allowed in so they can cook meals, and housekeepers are allowed in for them. The only other I believe that's allowed in is if a cardinal needs like a personal nurse for them.
Yeah.
I believe they're allowed in.
I
And
think Cardinal Wuerl, who was the Archbishop of DC, I think he was in the conclave that elected John Paul II. One of those, because he was a young priest at the time. I might be I might be a little fuzzy on the details, but yeah, I was kind of fascinated by that.
Yeah. So it's very strict. So anybody other than that is not allowed in at all. It is completely locked down. Like I said, they obviously can't watch TV. They can't have their cell phones. They can't have a radio. They can't listen to the radio. They even can't receive newspapers from the day. Like they can't receive anything. They are completely shuttered in there, again, for the secrecy part. So those are the people that are allowed in kind of the sequestered area. Obviously, in the conclave itself, not all of those people are allowed in there.
Right.
During the voting itself, it is the cardinal electors. Even those masters of ceremonies, those people that are in there to help kind of while the process is happening, they leave once the balloting begins. So it is the cardinals themselves that are in there. And then once the ballots have been cast, those few people, the secretaries, can come back in to help the process, but they are not actually present in the Sistine Chapel. It's actually locked from the inside while the actual voting is going on. It is strictly private during that process. So, like we said, a 2/3 majority is what is required for the voting. Again, I heard they announced yesterday 133 cardinal electors will actually cast ballots. There's 135 total that are eligible, but 2 of them for medical reasons or something will not be present to actually cast ballots. So there will be 133, whatever the math is for that, for 2/3 majority is required.
Yeah, I don't even know. 120 would be 80. So it's an additional 9? So they have to get 89 votes.
Yeah, something like that. And it is strict, so it is not valid until they hit that number, whatever that number is. And the number can also change like while they're there. So if they're not physically present or if they're not able to vote, they can't vote.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we can get into this, but there's different things for if they're sick, if they have to leave for some reason. John Paul is very clear in there of what the process requires. So John Paul lists that there are 3, what he calls some phases of the actual voting process. So the first is called the pre-scrutiny phase. So the pre-scrutiny phase is where they distribute the paper ballots to the electors. And then by lot, whatever that means, I guess they draw out of a hat or they do something by lot. They select 3 different types of people. The first they call them scrutineers. So there are 3 scrutineers, and those are the ones who actually count the completed ballots. 3 infirmari. Again, these are all by lot. The 3 infirmari are those that go back to the apartments to gather ballots from those that are sick. They're in conclave, but they are not present, but they're eligible to vote. They can go and they can collect the ballots from those that are sick if they're not physically present in the Sistine Chapel. So those are called infirmari. The last ones are what they call revisers. And those are the ones that basically verify the votes after the scrutineers have counted the vote. So there's 9 cardinals in total for those 3 scrutineers, 3 infirmari, and 3 revisers. And again, those are elected by lot. And it's not like they're there the whole time. That's I believe it's like every day they reelect. I don't think it's every ballot. Or maybe it's like the 2 sessions in the morning, they may redo it at the end of the day, something like that. But it's just pull out a hat and those are elected. They don't do anything special besides those things. But that's their role for that day or that ballot or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So it's even clear that the ballots are rectangular pieces of paper. So it specifies what the ballot looks like. So it's a rectangular piece of paper. The top half of the ballot is written "Eligo in Summum Pontificem." So that's written on the top. The lower part is blank, which is where they write who they elect. And then it says they have to fold it twice. So I guess they fold it in half and then fold it like hamburger style. Uh, it also says that they should.
John Paul II didn't write folded hamburger style. That would be hilarious.
Yeah, it would be very funny. But it literally is like, it says they are to fold it twice. And it's something like, it's not worded exactly like this, but it's worded to the sense of they should fold it so they don't know whose ballot it is. And their handwriting should not be like noticeable for, I don't know how the cardinal electors would know who their brother cardinal's handwriting looks like, but basically it needs to be legible, but it doesn't need to be, indicative of who the vote was cast by. Sure. So it's trying to be as secret as possible because it's by secret ballot. So you vote and nobody else knows who you voted for every time. Mm-hmm. So after they fold it twice, it begins what they call the scrutiny phase. So that was the pre-scrutiny. We're now in the scrutiny phase. This is when they place the ballots actually in the box. In this, I guess it's legitimately a box with a little hole at the top that they insert the things in, mm-hmm. and they mix them so they're more anonymous, and then they obviously they start opening the votes to count them. So it's again, John Paul is very clear. Once the cardinals have written down their ballot or written down their vote on their ballot, and they've done all the folding, they each individually process up to the altar in the Sistine Chapel, and they say out loud, and this is written in the document, "I call as my witness Christ the Lord, who will be my judge, that my vote is given to the one before God I think should be elected." So they say that every time they come up. They say that out loud, I guess, to everybody, to the altar, and they place their ballot on a plate that's on top of the ballot box. They place it, and then they dump their ballot into the ballot box. I'm assuming that this is so they don't like slip a piece of paper or something out.
2 or 3 or 4 votes.
Something like that. I don't know. Yeah. That might be why, but they literally put it on a plate and they dump the plate in the ballot box and then place the plate back on top, and then they leave and they process back to their seat. The next person goes, and that's how it goes until everybody has cast their ballot. And then at this point, after the infirmari have cast their ballot, they then go to the apartments and gather the ballots from, if there's any cardinals there. And it's very strict too. They have a box that's locked with a lock, and the key is left in the Sistine Chapel. And then they go to the infirmari. The infirmari go to those cardinals, and they do the same process. They collect that ballot. They put the ballot in that locked box. They bring it back. I believe it's the scrutineers then unlock it, and then they dump the ballots in the ballot box, and they have to make sure that the number of ballots cast match the number of electors to make sure, again, that I guess nobody's slipping extra ballots in there to ensure that actually one vote is cast per cardinal. So once all of the ballots have been cast, the first scrutineer will then take each ballot and verify the vote and mark it down. He passes it to the next one. The second scrutineer does the same thing, passes it to the third one, and then he actually announces out loud the vote, who the vote was cast for, and then they're marking down and they're checking the number of votes per cardinal. Mm-hmm. And then once they're completed with that, they ensure that the ballots match the number of cardinals. So if there's some discrepancy of numbers, it's an invalid thing, and they do the whole process again. Mm-hmm. So the number has to match for obvious reasons. You don't want extra ballots cast. Yeah. After it's so fascinating. And you would never hear this if you didn't read this document. 'Cause I still haven't heard any of the news outlets talk about this, but after the vote has been read aloud by that third scrutineer, the ballot is threaded by needle on a
Yeah, I forgot
string,
about that. Yeah.
and the ballot is threaded through the word "eligo," that first word that's written on
Ah.
the top.
Mhm.
They thread the needle through that word on each ballot, and they start stringing the ballots on this string. And then once all of those ballots are cast, they tie that string together so they have a bundle of all of those written ballots together. And so that ensures that, there's no finagling with those ballots. And then after that, this is he calls it the post scrutiny phase, which is the last phase. And this is where all of the votes are obviously counted. They're checked to make sure that they were valid votes, that all the votes match to the number of cardinals. And then they burn the ballots. So they burn that whole bundle together. And then they burn like any notes or any kind
It's
of
scrutiny sheets. I think each of the Cardinals still get little scrutiny sheets to
they
keep
get
the
some kind
tally
of little
themselves.
sheet. They also, I didn't know this until Cardinal Dolan was talking about it, but they get a full, like, it's like a huge piece of paper that's got all of the Cardinals listed.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that they're working with if they don't know who they're voting for or something. And
Right.
I guess they've got like a little piece of paper that I guess is where they write notes down. So all of that is collected and all of that is burned together. So they burn everything from that particular balloting session. Obviously, if no election was held, then they insert, I believe it's some kind of chemical into the furnace that produces the black smoke.
Mm-hmm.
Then the vote ceases, and if there was no election, and if it was the first ballot cast for that session, they immediately start again and they re-vote. And if there's no ballot again after the second session, they burn, they stop, and they have, however long the pause is, they come back in the afternoon, whole process starts again. Again, if there's no election, they stop for the next day and then resume until there is a 2/3 majority vote. And then obviously we know the white smoke and all that kind of stuff happens. And like we talked about a little bit at the beginning, I have it written here so we can. I actually had to write this out on a piece of paper when I was reading it to make sure that I got the dating correct for those balloting sessions for when there was a break.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's no election after 7 ballots, the first 7, which again is depending on when the day starts, it can be a few days, but after 7 ballots are cast, there's a day pause, a full day for prayer, reflection, for conversation between the cardinals. Then it starts again, 7 ballots, pause for a day. Once again, 7 ballots, pause. After that session, so this is now there's been three 7-vote sessions. After that, they come back for that 4th section. If there's still no election after that third of the 7, it then goes to what I said before, where they have the 2 that have gotten the most votes become basically the only 2 they can vote for, and then they resume. And again, 2/3 majority until they get an election that happens, and then that person immediately is asked, do they accept? John Paul says that the person who is elected should not refuse it, but basically they should submit humbly to the divine will. There's very famous quotes of Benedict when he was elected, of like, him not wanting it at all and very much not being happy that he was elected. But again, he
Yeah.
obviously accepted.
Mm-hmm.
Once they ask and the person accepts, they say, what name do you want to be called by? He says it. He is immediately supreme pontiff and head of the church at that exact moment that he accepts. So there's no like formal crowning. There's nothing. It is immediately for a valid election, 2/3 majority. Once he accepts, he is officially the supreme pontiff. and then he vests in I believe they call it, what is it, like the Room of Tears,
Yep. That's what they
where
call it. Yeah.
they vest that. I've heard that Gammarelli is the papal tailor. They have like 3 sizes of cassocks ready, and he vests. And then I think there's probably a little bit of conversation between the new pope and the cardinals. They all greet him, particularly. I think it's not like a veneration of him, but they basically make some kind of act of obedience towards the pope. So it's something kind of like that, I think, happens. And then they obviously go to the balcony of St. Peter's. We have the Habemus Papam, and then we have a pope. And then the conclave immediately ceases once that election is official. Immediately it's done. And but they still have that oath of secrecy that they took. So there can be no formal talking about what happened at the election. Obviously, people talk. So you kind of have some idea of the vote. It's been widely reported that when Benedict was elected, Francis was the second highest. So obviously a cardinal talked, which they're not supposed to do. So we do get some like that, but there's no official report from that. It remains secret. And so immediately we have a new pope, and he immediately resumes the office, and the Vatican resumes all of their normal stuff, and the papal interregnum ceases at that moment. So the document is crystal clear with all that. And during these general congregations that are happening now, they're also going over that document. So all of them get a copy of it. So hopefully they've read through it, so they know what's going on, because they're all following that document. Because again, there can be no aberration, or there can be no changing of that document during an interregnum. So they've got to know what it says, and they need to follow that as closely as possible for it to be a valid election, based on the authority of the previous pope, because there is no pope to make any decisions during an interregnum. So
yeah, exactly. Well, and
that's
especially because what I think 2/3 of the cardinal electors were appointed by Pope Francis, so they would never have voted in an election unless they were one of the people who helped out. But I think that's pretty rare. Maybe
exactly.
is it Cardinal Kraszewski from Poland was a master ceremonies for John Paul and for Benedict. So maybe he's one exception, but
possibly. And then there's obviously been a few that were elected by John Paul. There's a decent number that were elected by, or were chosen by, Benedict. And then I think the number keeps changing. I think it was like maybe in the 90s or something like that from Francis.
Yeah, I
don't know what it is now, because they officially have the 133 number, so it might be a little different. But yeah, it was somewhere in the 3/4, 2/3 were elected by him from all over the world too, which is fascinating.
Right. So when you read, I know we're already in an hour, because it's just super fascinating, and like you said, is so meticulous. But what, if anything, beyond what you already shared, were you kind of surprised by, or you found particularly interesting about the rules governing the conclave itself as you read it?
Yeah, I mentioned before about the voting age. That was really interesting, of how they calculate the day before the Pope dies or abdicates. If you're 79, you're eligible, but if you turn 80 on that day, you're ineligible. So that's really fascinating. The congregations is really cool too. The general congregations that they're in, you see all of that. Like, the Vatican is always posting stuff about the general congregation today, and this is what they talked about, and there were X number of cardinals present. And it's very interesting too that at those congregations, even non-electing cardinals are eligible to be there and are encouraged to be there. And they can also obviously give their own opinion of the state of the church and all that kind of stuff. But they have no voting authority once the conclave begins. When it does begin, John Paul talks about that those that are over 80 should be basically encouraging the faithful through masses at the basilicas and all that stuff to pray for the conclave, and that's their role during the conclave itself. So that was really, really fascinating. And then also, this isn't really necessarily about the document, but just kind of reading about the different cardinals and seeing and kind of trying to understand more of the dynamic between them, and then seeing how kind of the mainstream media just has no idea what's going on. Like they're trying to say this
Yeah.
stuff like these are the people that we think are, on the short list, and they're like, how did you even get that? Like you have no idea the process. Like, you know, uh, when John Paul was elected, John Paul was on nobody's radar.
Right. Yeah.
So like, yeah, you can have some front runners, but like, I mean, the Holy Spirit is guiding the church. So the Holy Spirit is very active in there, and you don't know how the voting is going to go. And I found it really interesting to read about too, that a lot of the cardinals really probably don't even know each other,
Right.
because they're from all over the place, and they've all been, 2/3 have been made cardinals by Francis. So maybe they've had a couple run-ins with each other, but a lot of them might not even know each other, nor have they met, nor have they talked or anything like that. So a lot of the process of the congregations, and while they're in Rome for these, really 16 days before the conclave, it's really getting to know each other, kind of coalescing, and see if they can coalesce around one person that they all kind of feel will best serve the church in that role. And then, yeah, I mean, they're going to have to hash out a lot of things. There's some camps, people of wanting different things. And, there's, as we all know, there's a lot of financial problems at the Vatican right now that the whoever's elected is going to have to deal with. So I've read some reporting. I like the Pillar. I follow the Pillar a lot, and they reported yesterday that a lot of the cardinals specifically want that addressed, because that is going to immediately pose a problem for whoever the next pontiff is. That there are a lot of financial problems going on. So it needs to be a decent administrator. We obviously want somebody that's holy and devout, and that's who we pray for, and that's what the church always needs. But the Pope is also an administrator, practically, in the world. So he's got to have some type of administrative skill to be able to handle that. So we don't know. We just pray for the conclave and pray for the cardinals, and hopefully that the person they elect is the person that will best fulfill that role for the church in line with the Holy Spirit. So
Yeah, nice. Well, I don't know that. Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. It's endlessly fascinating to me, obviously, but hopefully it's of benefit to our listeners. So here's the last thing. I know that people have predicted, till they're blue in the face. So I won't ask you to do that. I always like when we have guests on for the first time, who, if you could like run down your top 3 favorites, maybe beyond John Paul and Benedict, if you want. If not, that's totally fine. And you already did say that Benedict's your favorite, and obviously you have a soft spot for John Paul. So maybe beyond them, who are some of your favorites that you've run across in your spiritual life, in your studies, both?
Yeah. I have a special affinity for Leo the Great. I don't say my area of expertise. I'm not an expert in anything. If I was to venture to say the area that I am most competent in, it would be the early church, specifically like the theology, like the Christology of the early councils, and kind of that whole process. So I have a real, I wouldn't call it a devotion. It's more of like an intellectual appreciation for Leo, specifically like the Tome of Leo, that really settled a lot of the Christological problems in the 5th century, the early 400s. So I really have a special, again, I wouldn't say devotion, but I have a special affinity for Leo, specifically Gregor the Great as well. So I obviously there's like running tabs on who you think is going to be the Pope, and my guess for the names, again, this is totally random, I have absolutely no idea, is either Leo or Gregory. It's been a while since we've had them, and a little more intellectually depth than just we haven't had them. I think the next Pope will be particularly focused on clarity, as everybody knows that was a struggle with Pope Francis. All of his good intentions, there was just a lack of clarity on a lot of things, for whatever reason. I'm not even accusing for any bad reasons. Just there was just lack of clarity, clearly.
Oh yeah.
So I think taking those two names, I think would be a signal for clarity. Obviously, they're both greats. We call them the great, especially Leo, obviously with the Tome of Leo, just the clarity of doctrine that he proposed, especially with Gregory, he was such a pastor. His papacy was much more like that. Obviously, the intellectual rigor of him as well. So I think that would signal to the church for those two things. So that's my guess. Would it be Leo the 14th and Gregor the 17th? That would be cool. It'd be cool to kind of go back in history to kind of, obviously St. Francis lived 800 years ago, but it's not really a regal papal name. But right. Gregory and Leo are very papal names. So I think it would be cool in the modern world to have that sign of the papacy again, which would be really cool. So those two, and then Pope Benedict. I wouldn't say that I appreciate what he did as Pope, but I have a real affinity for him, for his kind of theological work up until the papacy. He's the theologian I've read the most. He's the one that I probably cite the most. I find his stuff to be intellectually rigorous and accessible, and I think he's done just such a wealth of good for the church, and I think will be remembered for centuries to come. Kind of, I don't want to put him on the pedestal that Gregory and Leo are, but what he did for the church in this time, I think, does resemble that type of kind of clarity that especially Leo, kind of with the Tome of Leo, did. And I think we need that again, even barring from Francis and that kind of stuff. But in the world we live today, we really need that truth to be proclaimed clearly and definitively without losing kind of the pastoral dimension that Francis, I think, did a really good job with. We kind of need a conglomeration of doctrinal clarity, rigorousness, and also like the pastor heart of reaching out to the margins. And I think that was what he did particularly well, which Benedict did not do very well. That's just kind of that was not his kind of internal disposition, which is fine. They all have different strengths, but kind of, if you could mash them together, I think that's what the church could really use, and the world could also really use is those two together. So we'll see if we get that. If there's even somebody like that, I'm not sure. So
right, yeah. Well, I mean, the Lord does seem to do strange things when a guy gets elected Pope. So we'll see. It's very exciting. I was smiling too because Leo. I mean, I named my kids after him. I didn't mention that before we started recording, but yeah, Leo and Gregory are two of my very favorites for very similar reasons too. And even in the names, I think there's 2 or 3. Well, with Leo, there's 4 more who are saints, and with Gregory, I think there's 3 or 4 more too.
Yeah.
So even just like the legacy of Gregory the 10th, where the conclave came from, is a blessing. Correct. So that would be pretty cool. Yeah. I mean, selfishly for both of us, it'd be pretty cool to have those names. So,
and harkening back again, you're just harkening back to the early church too. I think with kind of the movement of the church's theology, kind of in that communio theology realm of the way that obviously Ratzinger and that post-Vatican II John Paul II did, it would also be kind of fitting to kind of that ressourcement going back to kind of reinvigorating the sources of the faith, going back to the early church and the fathers, and that would be cool. So we'll see. It'd be, or you could pick a name that's never been used before. That's who knows. So
well, I guess we'll know. I mean, the longest conclave has been 4 days, I think, since 1900. The longest conclave has been 4 days. So
it definitely doesn't take too long. I think Francis was like 3 ballots.
Yeah, 3 or 4. I forget.
And I think Benedict was like 4, maybe something like that. So it hasn't taken. I think John Paul's is a little longer.
8, I think I had heard.
Yeah, so his was a little bit longer. Again, he was kind of out of nowhere, and he was really young, which I don't think we will ever see again. I don't think anybody is up for a 25, 26 year papacy again. Not that, I mean, I think he was great, but I think 10 to 12 years is probably a better mark. You don't want kind of a regal reign of 50 years or something. So you definitely if you're under the age of 65, you're probably almost excluded
Yeah.
the way the church is now. So, it'll be fascinating to see. I'm very interested to see how that all shakes out. So,
yeah, likewise. Well, perfect. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Before we sign off, where can people find your work? Where can people follow you?
Yeah. So, on Substack, I write the publication, whatever you call it, newsletter publication. It's called In Defense of Theology. So if you search that, you'll find it. I write at least 2 pretty lengthy essays a week. The Friday one is specifically based on the Sunday gospel for that week, and I basically kind of pull some kind of theological topic out of the reading and then dive into that. I'm not a priest or anything. I'm not preaching or doing anything like that, but I like to kind of draw out some theological thing to kind of think about as you go into the Sunday. And then I post on Tuesdays as well. I mean, that's whatever my heart desires to write about, I write about. So, and then there'll be kind of interspersed stuff too, paid and free as well. So if you want to just kind of browse, you're welcome to browse. There's plenty of free stuff as well. So you can find that on In Defense of Theology. If you want to watch or listen to the podcast from the Parish, it's called Saints in the Parish podcast, and that's on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can find there as well. And if you want to reach out and ask some questions, Substack is definitely the easier place to do that. And I don't have any. I have personal social media, but not anything connected with this. So don't message me on anything that's not that. But
I won't link to those. I'll just link to the other two.
Yeah. But yeah, you're welcome to message me. I would love to talk and chat, and that would be fun. So yeah, on those that would be great.
Great. Well, Donald Paul Maddox was our guest today. Yeah, thanks again. This is great. As with every guest, I feel like I could talk for hours on this stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's really grateful for your work in general, but for doing a deep dive on that, and especially for coming on today and walking through all that stuff. And
absolutely.
We'll continue to pray together with all of our listeners for whoever the Lord brings next.
Yeah,
it'll be exciting one way or the other. All right. Well, thanks. I hope to have you on again. Maybe for the Tome of Leo. That would be a cool one. Once the dust settles, that'll be great.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
All right. Well, thanks. We'll see you all next time here on the Popecast.